Welcome to a new Skyroster training video. Today we'll continue the video we have started last week about the creation of a new draft roster by completing the last two steps in the template design wizard. Just a short recap, we are creating a new individual roster with shift pattern and we're selecting all employees from this unit. Next, we need to configure the hard and soft constraints based on which the optimum solution will be computed by the roster engine. Before we jump into this, it's useful to get an idea about how the roster engine works, so go ahead, pause this video and take a look at the one called, What is Skyroster?, which you can find in the Skyroster YouTube playlist. Alright, welcome back. So, as you've seen in that video, Skyroster is using a powerful constraint-based engine, which translates business rules into hard and soft constraints with associated scores. Then, the roster engine's job is to compute the solution with the highest score from the millions of possible combinations. In this process, the roster engine will always fulfill hard constraints and will work to fulfill soft constraints as much as possible. Alright, let's take a closer look at these rules, analyze what they mean and how to use them. The third step in the template design wizard is covering the hard constraints. Let's take them one by one. The locked assignments rule will tell the engine to keep the shift assignments which were added manually by the planners, even if a better solution can be generated when moving them. Basically, if the planner assigns some shifts to staff members, lock them and then start a solving process. If this rule is enabled, then the roster engine will have to build the working schedule around those manually assigned shifts. Next, the minimum rest time will instruct the engine to enforce the rest time between every 2 consecutive shifts. The rest time parameter is called minimum rest time after a shift and can be configured in shift planning, for each shift. The next set of hard rules, maximum hours worked per week, month and year, will ask the engine to respect these thresholds of worked hours for each period. But, in order for them to be effective, the roster period must be at least equal to the period on which the corresponding rule is enabled. For example, if we create a roster for 2 months and we enable the maximum hours worked per year, then this rule will have no effect, since the roster period is shorter than the one on which the rule is applied on. Okay, let's move on to the soft constraints now. The consecutive nights rule configures the maximum number of night shifts that can be scheduled in a row for one employee. Similar to this one, the maximum consecutive assignments rule sets the limit for how many shifts in a row are allowed for each employee. Total hours worked per template will set the limit for the maximum number of hours an employee can work on the roster that will be generated. For example, if we build this roster on 3 months, then the value for total hours worked per template should be calculated as 3 times the number of hours worked per 1 full working month. Enabling the day shifts distribution will instruct the roster engine to take into account the fair distribution of day shifts among the rostered employees. The next 2 soft constraints, desired and undesired shifts, are configuring the roster engine to consider the days in which employees prefer to work or not. Each employee can set desired and undesired days in his calendar. Planners can configure these rules with different scores when they generate a new roster, depending on the desired outcome. For example, if we wish to increase employees' work satisfaction, we can set the score of these rules at 100, the maximum score. Or we can even set them with different values, if we want to prioritize the desired days over the undesired ones, for example. The last soft constraint, not required shifts assignments, will ask the roster engine to try and allocate more employees than the minimum number set in the manpower definition configured for this roster. For example, if we have a certain qualification, let's say tower controller, with a manpower of minimum 1 and maximum 3 and we enable this rule, then the roster engine will try to allocate 2 more tower controllers, on top of the required minimum of 1, when generating the solution. From the business perspective, this translates in more people on shifts than the minimum necessary to perform the same work, a direct approach to mitigating fatigue and increase employee happiness and well-being. As you can already imagine, there are numerous outcomes that can be achieved by tweaking these rostering strategies, constraints and scores, from increasing the workforce efficiency, lowering costs, complying with labor regulation and fatigue management to increasing productivity, employee happiness and work-life balance. It's very difficult to get all benefits at once, so decision factors need to analyze carefully the vectors they want to follow and configure Skyroster accordingly. With all these being said, we covered the last step in the template design wizard and we're now ready to save our draft roster. Next time, we'll see how we can finally generate a roster solution. Until then, stay safe and see you soon.